Welcome to the Ocean of Technology podcast, where we explore all things related to cybersecurity, data, and cloud technology.
Join us as we dive deep into the latest trends, news, and opinions on these crucial topics that impact our daily lives.
With expert analysis and thought-provoking discussions, we'll bring on guest speakers who are leaders in their fields to provide unique perspectives and insights.
Whether you're a tech enthusiast or a professional in the industry, this podcast is the perfect platform to stay up to date with the latest advancements in technology and hear what other leaders in the space think.
So grab your scuba gear and join us as we explore the depths of the ocean of technology.
Josh, we're so glad to have you on. Seriously, I've been seeing your LinkedIn posts, and I think some of them are hilarious, and a lot of them bring a lot of truth and light to some of the things going on in the marketplace and in cybersecurity in general. So really excited to have you on. Seriously.
Thanks for having us.
And before we get started, of course, for listeners out there, can you kind of explain who you are, Josh?
Sure. Josh Copeland. I'm one of the cybersecurity directors with AT&T. Essentially, what that means is I'm a vCISO for our SLTT, SLE customers, so state government, higher ed, K through 12, so on and so forth. Large background in IT, 25 plus years. 20 of that was with the United States Air Force, doing everything you possibly imagine. I've done Fed contracting, doing cloud platform security, ran a SOC for a little bit. So a very large base of knowledge, and probably most well known as the unpopular opinion guy on LinkedIn, as they kind of alluded to.
Yeah, how did you get that title as, Mr. Unpopular?
It totally started as a fluke accident. I did about 2 years ago now a series over a week of my rants on why certifications don't mean anything, why education doesn't mean anything, why experience doesn't mean anything. And it just kind of snowballed from there and became kind of a daily thing that I put out, and have amassed a small following of folks that enjoy that content.
I think the small following has grown into a much larger following here. So hopefully we can grow that following a little larger, because I think some of your content, I look at it and I'm like, wow, all right, that's intelligent. And some of the things aren't necessarily an unpopular opinion, but the way that you explain things, I like how you break things down a little bit deeper than just kind of a surface level overview, which is another reason why you're perfect for this. So I guess we'll cut into the first question.
Yeah.
Okay. So have you heard about the recent Google vulnerability? There's like 4 different types of vulnerabilities, and it allows an attacker to remotely compromise a phone at kind of a broadband level with no user interaction. Literally only need to know the victim's phone number. I mean, have you heard about that? What do you think about that?
Yeah, I actually heard about this about 6 days ago when the release got put out. This one's absolutely huge. It revolves around 4 major vulnerabilities and an additional 14 lesser degree vulnerabilities, particularly in the Samsung chips for Xenios. I think I pronounced that right. There's lots of weird letters in there, X's and Y's. The modem that's on Android-based devices for wearables, or Android phones, and even some vehicles have it. So definitely a broad base of technologies. And as a zero-click vulnerability, it's exploiting the functionality of the modem itself, taking the data and converting that to cell signal and cell signal back to data. So because of that, it's a critical junction of the technology where it gains basically unfettered access to your data flow in and out of the affected device, all your calls, text messages, cell data, without alerting you in any way, shape, or form. So it's massively huge when you take it from a kind of perspective of that. Things that you can do to kind of mitigate it until they release patches, or turn off Wi-Fi calling. Don't use that modem. Do applications do true end-to-end encryption. That way, it's encrypted before it hits that middle ground modem, and that gives you some level of safety. But it really highlights the criticality of understanding the total hardware and software inventories that you have in your environment, because how many organizations now have either half or all of their MDM devices, whether they be tablets or cell phones, that now are completely exposed if someone happens to want to exploit that. And how much do we share our cell phone numbers? They're on our business cards, they're on your LinkedIn, they're on your signature block, your email. I'm telling you, this is who I am, this is how to hack my device.
Wow, that's unbelievable. And from what I understand, Google said they're working on it, but apparently not fast enough, right?
Yeah, they don't have a release date. They did waive the normal embargo period. They usually keep them unreleased until they have a patch for it. But they realized that this was just so absolutely insane that it had to be released immediately so people at least knew what to do to start to protect themselves.
Did they told people to get off of Wi-Fi calling or something like that?
Yeah.
That was one of the protocol. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Wow.
the reason why is because you're on your Wi-Fi calling, you're redirecting instead of stuff going straight out through your cell signal, you're hitting that modem, converting it from data to cell signal and back. So that opens up that port to kind of get that information passing over it for your voice calls, text, and all the other stuff.
Wow. Wow. So this goes a lot deeper than, just one piece. It's an entire infrastructure that basically is compromised due to
Well,
one or four vulnerabilities.
yeah. Four vulnerabilities on one particular piece of a large infrastructure that everybody uses, whether it's, your smartwatch, your smartphone, your tablet, or even your car. So your car is one of those Android based cars. It's probably got the same vulnerability as well.
I didn't even think about that. Wow. That's crazy. And Josh, you want to take the next question? Because this is we can go on days.
I feel like we could go on for days with this topic itself.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. The way that vulnerabilities work is a lot of times you don't even need critical vulnerabilities. You just need enough of those low level vulnerabilities that you can get into one little nook and cranny and then pivot to another and pivot to another and move your way through a system. But when you have these massive ones like this, that just opens the floodgate.
Exactly. So I'll jump into the next question here. Can you kind of explain defense in depth and the challenges in developing a culture of security at your organization or at an organization in general?
Sure. I like to rate it like this. Attackers have to be right one time. That's it. They need to find one vulnerability in your entire suit of armor. Defenders have to be right 100% of the time. And then not only that, predict where other vulnerabilities will be before they even exist. So with that in mind, defensive depth is kind of providing layers of defense around your soft, squishy bits that you care about. So this is having people, processes, and technologies that are in place that not only provide layers, but provide kind of an interlocking posture in such a way that 0 days, when they happen, because they happen all the time, nonstop, that you ability to exploit those and be able to pivot is kind of mitigated. So you kind of look at it from, if you're looking at a castle, you have a moat that protects you, then you have a drawbridge that gives some protection, the thick castle walls, and you have inner buildings inside that they're fortified. And you kind of look at that and like, okay, I have a firewall that's protecting my boundary, so that's kind of like my moat. And then I have ACLs and VLANs on my routing and switching, so that's kind of like that drawbridge that's allowing certain stuff to come in, certain stuff to go out, and only those things in conjunction with my firewall. I put in host-based security tools like EDR and software firewalls. That's where I'm protecting those inner buildings. I'm doing IDS, IPS, so all those tracks between those buildings, I'm monitoring that to see if anything's kind of being wonky. I'm doing system hardening, so I'm making those walls super thick. I'm making sure that I've gone through and looked for any cracks in that building to make sure that we patch it, we get it fixed, and that we know what's there. And if it's something we can't fix, we know about it, we've done additional remediation for it. And then top all that off with kind of a nice bow of continuous monitoring. I'm constantly looking at all these things, whether it's through a SIM or if I'm doing, traditional continuous monitoring by doing vulnerability scans. I'm doing, external pen tests. I'm doing digital footprinting to make sure that the things I'm doing are actually working and they're achieving what I'm expecting them to do. So each one kind of provides a critical capability in an overlapping layer of protection to your overall enclave.
Awesome. And I know you threw out a lot of terminologies that some of the some of the crowd might not know, or the listeners might not know, as some people are just jumping into the field. Can you kind of break it down a little dummy simplified? There's the book for dummies to explain some of those terminologies like IDS, things like that.
Sure. So I mentioned ACLs. So those are your access control list. There are ways for your networking infrastructure to say this is what's allowed, this is what's not allowed. It could be port or protocol based. It could be done through VLAN, so virtual LAN networks, where you're saying I'm only allowing traffic from this environment to talk to these individual devices. IPS, IDS, so intrusion detection systems and intrusion prevention systems. These are kind of usually network-based tools where they're looking at the traffic and kind of looking for things that are outside of what your baseline are, looking for particular signatures of known vulnerabilities. System hardening is just kind of doing all those things that you'd expect an organization to do. Make sure things are patched the way they're supposed to. Do those configurations that make your system stronger. That way, bad things don't happen to them. I'm enforcing GPOs, or group policy objects. I'm doing, enforcement of two-factor authentication. I'm doing kind of all these things that help make it harder for bad actors to do things against my system.
Awesome. I wanted to add another term in there. If you could explain also, WAP.
WAP. Web access firewall or wireless access firewall, depending on which one you're using. And they both function essentially the same way as a regular firewall. It's saying, I'm building a wall between me and everything else out there. And what I'm doing with that is saying, I'm only going to allow these specific things. So I have a web application firewall. I'm only going to allow stuff to come in from my front end through to my back end using this specific port, using this specific protocol, using these specific credentials. That way, I'm adding layers of protection between, my critical juicing data that other people want, and maybe that vulnerable front end that, might have vulnerabilities on it. Maybe I'm using an outdated struts like Experian was doing, or maybe I have a issue where I'm not doing good data validation and it might be susceptible to an SQL injection attack. It helps limit out the things that can be done against your environment.
Yeah, the reason I asked that question, I actually have an ISACA team. I don't know if you're familiar with the organization ISACA, but I have an ISACA team that I'm mentoring for their national case study. And so I know some of them are going to watch this video, and we talked a lot about WAF relating to the case study. So yeah, figured I'd bring it up.
So thank you for kind of going through a little bit more in depth for those different terminologies for our audiences that may not understand them. The next question, though, I really want to know is, everyone is cost cutting right now. McKinsey, says the damages caused by cyber attacks will be close to 10.5 trillion by 2025. Is this the time to cost cut your cybersecurity team or no?
So it really isn't about cost cutting as much as it is taking a good hard look at the tools that you already have. What tools do you have? What capabilities are you using of those tools? What capability might be there that you're not using? I've done audits of other organizations where I come in as a CISO to, help kind of figure out what they need to do for their next layer. And they're evaluating tool sets. And I look at what they already have in place and go, the tool you already have that you're already paying for, it's already licensed, does 3 of the 5 things you want this other tool to do. So you're just paying extra for things. Maybe I'm leveraging the tools I already have a little bit better, or investing in training for those tools rather than spending a couple $1 million in licensing fees for a new tool. Do I have redundant capabilities? Am I using 3 different things that all kind of do the same thing? Can I collapse those and get better efficiencies? So really taking a look at those things first to kind of save money on that end. So then you're either investing in the right tools and technologies, so you're getting the best return on investment. And am I meeting my compliance requirements? Am I addressing the specific risk to my organizations? If I have a specific risk and I'm not addressing that, maybe I should be. But if I don't have that type of risk, so am I going to spend a lot of money on physical security badging systems and things of that nature if I don't have a physical data center for that? Sure, I could check that off on a list saying, yes, I have, badges to get in, but I'm running a cloud-based infrastructure. I'm not spending my money wisely. I'd be better off making sure that I have the right technology in my cloud and doing the right identity access management in my cloud, make sure that I'm doing my cloud checker tools to make sure that I'm configured properly. I don't have, S3 lakes that are sitting out there with any permissions that anybody can get into. So it's not so much cutting your budget, but making sure that you're using your budget well. Now, you might get to a point where you have to make tough decisions and choose what your risk level is, what your risk acceptance is, and you might have to cut your budget. But that's your second or third step in compared to, just figuring out, am I doing it right in the first place?
I love that you brought up the fact of access to these lakes, especially after we went on a meeting with Databricks, and they were saying how, the differences between, the data house, the data lake, and how they have the same permission sometimes, and it's being cross-mingled, and there's having issues with that.
Yeah, one of the biggest things with any of your SaaS or cloud-based products is insecure configurations. When things are deployed, they're a lot of times in default and they work. I've been in environments where, I've looked at network switches, and it's a Cisco switch that they literally pulled out of the box, took the shrink wrap off, racked it into the thing and plugged things into it. And yes, it absolutely works, but it's still admin for the password and all the default configurations. It's not secure in any way, shape, or form. And you're not really doing anything with it other than passing traffic. So you have to really understand what my tool is and what am I doing with it. Am I doing all the proper security? Have I looked at, what the best practices are? Have I looked at CIS benchmarks? Have I looked at a DISA-STIG? Or am I cross-referencing NIST 853, 800, 171, and kind of doing those access controls based off of what's best practice?
I mean, I'm hearing a lot of, I just heard some NIST framework terminology thrown out. Do you want to explain NIST? I mean, you worked a lot in government, right? So yeah. NIST is like really your bread and butter.
So NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. So it's the US-based organization that says, what a foot is, what a minute is, what a second is. They also develop standards for everything, particularly IT. If you look at the series, the 800 series publications are typically IT cybersecurity. And the big ones for most of us are the 853 and 800 171. So that's your controls for regular systems and cloud-based systems. And they really tell you how to, in broad scope, what's best practice for configuring and hardening a system. There are lots of ways to implement those things, and you can use tools like computer or information system benchmarks, CIS benchmarks, DISA-STIGs, and vendor-provided hardening guides to meet those and do cross-referencing between those. There are some great tools out there that have kind of helped make that easier to crosswalk those and understand your real level of hardening. And even going back into things like HIPAA compliance or SOC 2 Type 2 compliance, all kind of relate back to NIST and will refer you back to the controls related to that, whether it's access control or continuous monitoring and things of that nature, where it basically kind of gives you that really ground level framework to really start building your cybersecurity program.
So the next question I kind of have for you, before I even jump into the next question, there was something that kind of correlated with me or resonated with me what you first said in the beginning of that answer to that question, and that's that these companies aren't leveraging their tools correctly within cloud or cybersecurity and overall. And that's a real big thing that I see with most companies is that they're just not leveraging the technology to its fullest capabilities. For an example, I can't say client's name, but let's say that this one company was using Smartsheets, right? And they weren't actually leveraging the full capability of Smartsheets, but only using it to 20%. And because of that, they're using other applications to supplement what Smartsheets could have done for them, right? And I feel like a lot of, these cost cutting can actually be saved just by, fully leveraging these actual tools and softwares. But to jump into the next question, I just had to say that I was like, it just resonated really well. On your current project, what are some of the pain points you're currently having? And do you think funding would actually alleviate those pains for you?
Sure. So one of the biggest pain points is those of us in cybersecurity really need to help the business side of the organization understand not only what our requirements are, but how cybersecurity provides a real return on investment to the business, how making it directly, either directly or indirectly, generates dollars and cents for the organization. There are a lot of things that we do, and as a cybersecurity person, we want to do this because it's security, it's the right thing to do. But then there are other things that we can try to start leveraging in and make it understand. Money is the language everyone understands. It's math. 1 + 1 = 2. Straightforward type of stuff that is universal. So I started explaining that we're a publicly traded company. We have to comply with Sarbanes-Oxley Act, so we have to comply with SOX. We're dealing with credit card data, so we might have to do PCI DSS as one of our standards that we have to comply with. We're dealing with health data, so we have to have HIPAA. And if we don't meet these minimum requirements, we're going to generate fines. We're just going to generate possibility of, having a company-ending event. And one of the big things to understand is, over half of all attacks affect SMB market, so your small to medium size organizations. And with the average breach costing about $4 million, that's a company ending event. For an SMB, $4 million, you're done. You're shuttering the doors. You don't have that kind of capital. And when you factor in things like cyber insurance, they're getting much more granular in their, requirements. 10 years ago, when they first started issuing out cybersecurity insurance, they didn't really have actuary tables. They were just writing policies for anybody and anything. You just kind of said, yeah, we're secure, we're good. They write you a policy. Now 10 years down the road, there's been a lot of payouts, and they've generated a lot of data, and they've determined, what does secure really look like? They're going to look for things like, provide me a SOC 2 type 2 audit that says not only are you secure, but you can show a third party has attested that you're secure. They're going to look at you and hold you accountable to that. There was a case recently where Travelers Insurance sued one of their insured parties because they wanted to claim on their cybersecurity insurance, and they had represented that they had two-factor authentication, which they did. They did not have two-factor authentication enforced. And as we know, words have meaning, and Travelers took it as if you said I had two-factor authentication, you were enforcing two-factor authentication. They were not, and of course they were breached using not having two-factor authentication. So there was actually a lawsuit that went on about that to kind of, they say you weren't doing your part. You didn't do your due diligence to secure your environment. So we're going to see a lot more things like that. And cybersecurity insurance is really kind of upping the game on proving that you're as secure as you think you are. So when you kind of look at that, helping the organization understand that and where there's kind of changes in that. Yes, I'm going to spend, $100,000 on this new tool, but it's going to save me $200,000 off of our annual premium for our cybersecurity insurance. Or they're actually going to pay in the event that something does actually happen. So kind of translating that to those different pieces is the really hard part of being a cybersecurity professional, because we understand the bits and bytes really, really well. We're not always great at explaining the bits and bytes to business folks where they understand it in dollars and cents. I can talk where I need 5 nines uptime as a cybersecurity guy or as a IT professional, and I know what that means. Super low downtime, so on and so forth. But business person doesn't care. Now, if I tell them the difference between 4 nines and 5 nines is $300,000 in revenue per day, magically they get it. It makes sense of why that's important. So that's kind of that skill that you have to start developing as you become more of a senior cybersecurity person. So does money help with that? So funding? Yeah, funding can absolutely help alleviate some of that stuff. But really, it's being able to articulate why it's important in a way that other people understand that aren't technical will give you the most bang for your buck and kind of help soothe those pain points.
I actually, it's amazing that you said that, because I saw a post from a recent new CISO, and he was saying the way that he got to be up to CISO, I don't know if it might have been your post, but the way he got up to be CISO so quickly was the fact that he was able to articulate the business case of everything that he did. They trusted him with every dollar in their wallet because he articulated his business case on every single decision made while he's been there, and he got promoted within 3 years in that organization. So really inspiring story. I did also want to touch on the small and medium business case that you were explaining, where you have like a potentially catastrophic business ending breach. And hopefully some of the unpopular opinion comes out here, because I'm going to put a very very shaky topic on the table. So you have a large organization like an Equifax. You get a breach from an Equifax, right? 145 million records leaked, and there's almost no consequences. They're still standing today. But small, medium business has a breach of 500,000 records, and their whole business is over. What are your thoughts on kind of too big to fail in the cybersecurity realm?
So I am absolutely one of those folks that I hate the way that we do fines within, pretty much all of cybersecurity related incidents, whether it be US, EU, doesn't really matter. GDPR has been leveraged a bunch of fines against major US corporations, not naming any names, but we all use it every day. And what it really is they're dropping these huge dollar figures, but they're not huge to the companies in which they're being dropped. So I'm absolutely a proponent that they should start switching that from straight dollar figures to percent of gross revenue. If you tell a company that you're going to lose 10% of your gross revenue because you got breached and it was negligence and not, through no fault of your own, that's huge because that affects every company in an equal kind of way. It's not an event that, might kill a SMB, but it's really going to draw attention to a large, FANG level organization where they're going to get paid or fined billions of dollars instead of, millions of dollars.
I don't know if I would
No.
consider that an unpopular opinion for the public, but definitely an unpopular opinion for stakeholders.
Yeah, well, even the public, they're publicly traded companies. If the company that you are, invested in loses 10% of their gross revenue, you're not getting a dividend that year. So definitely a double-edged sword.
And then another thing that I wanted to touch on was something that I dealt with in my cybersecurity case study when I was in ISACA, and that was legacy technology. Very often, vulnerabilities are exploited on some really legacy technology. And a lot of these long-standing companies have these random applications that are handled by legacy technology. What are your thoughts on that? Have you had to deal with any of that? And then, just like any pain points that you felt when you were dealing with any of those cases?
Yeah, technical debt is always something that is extremely hard to deal with because you often come into cases like you kind of illustrated where you have these applications that are just too big to fail. I'll give the example of New Jersey at the beginning of the COVID-19 epidemic, where they wanted to change the way the unemployment worked because they were trying to add in the COVID rules, but it was running on COBOL backend. And they couldn't find anybody who was actually good enough at COBOL to actually make those changes. I learned COBOL back in 1998 when I first joined the Air Force, and that was 30 years old then. Finding somebody in, the late 20 teens that was fluent in COBOL and not, 60 plus is extremely hard. So they were offering, salaries of $300,000 a year to come fix this because they had to pay a premium because it was a lost skill. You have the case of the one school district that was running their entire HVAC system on a Amiga computer from the 1980s for 30 years. And the reason why they didn't replace it was to replace it would have cost them $4 million. And they finally ended up having to replace it because the guy that had been maintaining it since he was in high school was finally retiring and couldn't support it anymore. And plus, parts were getting kind of hard to find. But you're dealing with that kind of technical debt where, do I really want to spend $4 million to replace the system? Well, I don't want to, but I absolutely need to. We have the issues with water treatment plants that have been exploited, numerous times over the last few years. And they're a great example of those no-fail systems that people are hesitant to do typical IT patching and maintenance because they're afraid it's going to break. Microsoft has gotten much better. In the early days of my career, when you had Patch Tuesday, it was definitely a 50-50 gamble that if you ran the patch, you were going to get a blue screen and take down your server. Now it's not so much, but you still run that kind of risk of, am I doing this patch and then is it going to fail? If I'm running a water treatment center that's handling water and sewage for even a small size metropolitan area, the net effect of that being down is absolutely huge. So they're very leery to update those things. There's a municipality somewhere in Louisiana, I won't say where, that is still running on a absolute vanilla Windows 2000 system. Has never been patched and has been rebooted the The last time I looked at it was about 15 years ago was the last time it was rebooted. So imagine what a bad actor could do with that system.
I was gonna
Oh
say
my
all
gosh.
the old Windows have been hacked so many times. Oh man.
Wow. I just think about the pipeline thing
Yeah.
that happened a couple of years ago, right? It was a couple of years ago. That's probably due to a similar. I didn't actually know what happened on that breach, but I assume it was similar legacy
Well,
technology.
yeah, you have a lot of legacy technology. Even if you go back to the Experian breach, that wasn't a new vulnerability. That vulnerability had been out for months and months. They just
Oh,
didn't have
Equifax, yeah.
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 You know, sorry, Equifax, not Experian, but it had been out for months and months. It wasn't a new vulnerability. It's just they didn't have a robust vulnerability management program that was identifying the things that they really needed to identify that weren't meeting that current baseline. So sometimes it's not even your technical debt, it's your process of understanding what you have, where it's at, and whether or not you are patching or not patching.
Yeah, that IT inventory aspect, absolutely. And actually, the whole reason why I knew about the legacy vulnerabilities was 100% because of that case. When I heard about the way that they dealt with disputes, I was like, oh, okay, interesting. A lot of legacy technology here for a multi-billion-dollar corporation. You would think they would update, but all right. So to move on to the next question. So for someone who's entry level, interested in cybersecurity, what subsectors do you see growing the fastest? And I guess what are your recommendations to someone getting into the space?
So I think the fastest growing way to get in cybersecurity is probably in the GRC governance kind of area, largely because we're now becoming a much more governance and compliance based career field. Everybody's dropping regulations, whether they be privacy regulations from California to Colorado, Virginia, New York State, GDPR, each individual company or country running their own version of privacy laws, each state having privacy laws. You're dealing with the new stuff coming out from the SEC that's forcing cybersecurity to be kind of put first and foremost to a lot of organizations, holding C-suite executives individually accountable, forcing a cybersecurity expert to be on your board. So all of that leads into a lot of this compliance-based stuff. If you're into federal contracting, CMMC is going to be absolutely huge for you. And that's going to require a lot of folks that know and understand governance, risk, and compliance. And what's really great about GRC is you don't have to be super technical to get into it. You don't have that really steep learning curve of understanding how to do things like Python or how to do networking or any of those type of really hard to master cybersecurity skills. This gives you that really good introduction and that you can then branch out into other areas. Cloud is obviously huge. Everyone's moving to the cloud just because it makes a lot of financial sense. You're changing stuff from big upfront capital expenses to predictable operations expenses. It's far more scalable than having on-prem stuff. And then you're doing, going back to that governance piece, you're doing some shared security model where you're getting folks that you might not be able to afford that level of skill taking care of those security pieces that are now on your service provider. So anything cloud is going to be a great way to get in and then really grow within the field. Then looking into just security stack tools, becoming masters of EDR, XDR solutions, those response tools, whether it's vulnerability management tools like Qualys or Tenable, feeding that continuous loop of information is going to be there for a long time. So kind of building that out gives you that good foothold in and then a great path forward. And then obviously cybersecurity, always having some time spent in a SOC is going to be huge. That gives you that super broad understanding of how a network really works and all the pieces and parts and how all the security tools kind of interlock together to form like that armor around your environment.
Only concern that I have with the governance focus right now is a lot of companies, they're just not really paying their governance cybersecurity staff that much. I don't know if you've noticed that, but I've seen a lot of companies, looking for these governance roles, 8 years, 9 years, 10 years within this profession, and they're paying them really low salaries. Do you see that as well within, and I'm talking about Fortune 500 companies here. Do you see that as well?
I've seen kind of a hit or miss on it. I've seen some organizations where they're just exceedingly low, but then I'll counter that with, organizations that want an entry-level SOC analyst to have a CISP and 5 years experience, and that's not realistic either. And they want to pay them $20 an hour. I'm like, none of that makes any sense. So you have a lot of issues where you have hiring managers not working with the HR folks to write really good job descriptions. They're not doing market research to find out what the actual, average rate is for that. And COVID-19 really kind of opened the aperture on that, because salaries are far more normalized at a national level now than they were, 3-4 years ago, because we've now made these roles so remotable. Where before I was looking for somebody in this particular, subset region, whether I was Dallas, Fort Worth, or New York City, or, some small town in Iowa, you could have the same person doing essentially the same job for the same size organization and wildly different salaries based off those locations. But now, because remote has become kind of a very much not necessarily standard, but viable option across the board, I now have to compete with everybody that's hiring the same type of person. So those salaries are going to slowly kind of creep up and normalize across the board, because competition kind of breeds that normalization.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because it's just really sad to see these large companies trying to lowball these professionals, right? Who really have, this experience under their belt. They're coming from these large consultancies. They've come from these other Fortune 500 companies, and they're being lowballed into these positions because they can't find a job right now, right? And it's just really sad to see sometimes. That's why I had to bring it up.
Yeah. With the current economic situation, unfortunately, we're going to see a lot of that for the short-term future until we have some economic changes. And that comes with the standard, economic things of supply and demand. As organizations are downsize and, cut staff, we're flooding these markets with all these super experienced folks, and it becomes hyper competitive. Now compare that to, 3-4 years ago, where, we had not enough people to fill even the jobs that already had people in that have left, let alone the new positions we're filling. So economic factors definitely come into play in the kind of big macroeconomic scale.
Yeah, so I guess something that I was a little curious about from an overall market standpoint. So you see companies like Netrix, I think Cloudflare also, some of the big providers of either cybersecurity, content, things like that. They're aggregating a bunch of their competitors together and putting together kind of a vertical stack of can offer everything. What do you think about that? Has that changed the way you view certain vendors? Just what's your thoughts on that?
So that's absolutely kind of the nature of how things go. It's why MSPs exist. You take all these disparate products and you kind of put them together, smash them into a unified security stack with a set of professionals that know those things intimately, and you're able to do economy of scale value. And that's really what you're looking at when you're kind of seeing these things where, for me to run we'll say a tenable instance, I need at least 1.5 FTEs. So I need someone who's really, really good at this. And then I need someone who's probably a half FTE, so half person. So that person can go on vacation. They can, get sick. They can, have a baby, do all those things that humans do. Conversely, if I'm taking that and using it as part of a larger MSP, I'm only paying for a fraction of a person, because I'm not using that service 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I'm really using it, a couple hours a week when I'm doing those scans. So I'm getting economy of scale because it's being shared by a larger number of people, but then I'm also only paying what I'm using. I'll kind of take that back to, and particularly in financial departments, you might have to do, really big quarterly computing where you're preparing your quarterly financial reports. In a on-prem model, I have to buy hardware that supports that, 1 week a quarter computing process. And then make sure that I buy enough of it that I'm able to scale that up over the next 3 to 5 years and kind of predict how much I'm going to use 3 to 5 years from now. And I'm only really running it 1 month total a year. Now, conversely, I could do that in a cloud-based provider where I just spin the box up for that 1 week. And yeah, I'm using a huge amount of compute, but I'm only using it for that 1 week and I'm turning the box back off. So I'm getting a huge amount of return on my investment because I don't have to get all that hardware in front that I'm not using and is going to depreciate. Where on cloud-based, I'm only paying for what I'm using. So that's kind of where a lot of things are going, is they're allowing you to pay for what you're using and aggregate to larger organizations where you couldn't just get that pricing on your own.
Yeah, I completely agree with that pay by usage model that's being pushed so much by all these different cloud providers, giving, the scalability and flexibility to these companies in which they can actually use it when they need it, right? Instead of using it or having it when they need it, but they don't use it all the time, right?
Yeah, and that was definitely one of the big pushes from cloud providers as the original business case to big companies is, hey, we can flex with what your needs are. So I guess cybersecurity is gravitating towards that way as well, which is interesting to see. Definitely interesting to see. I think that's all the questions that we have. I thought I had one more, but I can't remember it. But I'm sure we'll love to have you back on another podcast. And yeah, I want to thank you so much for coming on, Joshua.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time.
Thank you for joining us on the Ocean of Technology podcast,
where we explore all things cybersecurity, data, and cloud. I'm Nate.
And I'm Josh, and we hope you've enjoyed diving deep with us. If you're looking for top-tier staffing and recruitment solutions to enhance your cybersecurity, data, and cloud capabilities, look no further than Ocean Staffing.
Our team of experts can help you find the right talent to take your projects to the next level.
Don't forget to follow us on social media and stay tuned for more insights, news, and opinions on the latest tech trends. And remember, why fish from a lake when you can fish from the ocean?
Thank you for joining us on the Ocean of Technology podcast.
where we explore all things cybersecurity, data, and cloud. I'm Nate.